Hello everyone, and welcome again to my channel. This time I wanted to talk about what is true love. And the reason for that is because, spoiler alert, there is a release at this year's regional convention of a video entitled either What is True Love or True Love. So I figured I would talk about that. And in honor of that, the Elder Bear is dressed up in his 80s hairband style, and he's ready to help everyone find true love. Well, not really. So anyways, the thesis of the video that's released is basically a couple of kids, all Jehovah's Witnesses. So a young sister who's spiritually minded, meaning that she does the organization's activities, she wants to pioneer, and so on and so forth, meets a young man who moves into her congregation. But this young man is not baptized and he doesn't go to all the meetings. But the sister begins to fall in love with him. And the parents tell her in no uncertain terms that absolutely not, he's not a spiritual head, and she can't have a good relationship with someone who's not a spiritual person. So right away, the emphasis is made that the most important thing in a relationship is someone's spiritual qualifications. That's the first thing you look for. So the young sister breaks it off, and shortly thereafter, another young sister is interested in this same person, and they begin a relationship and wind up getting married later on. Now this young sister is upset because she sees her friends getting married and she doesn't have anyone she's interested in. But she continually meets this brother who's also a spiritual person, and he's a pioneer. At one juncture he's giving a talk in her hall, so I'm guessing that means he's an elder. So this happens over time. But the other sister, who had this really short relationship with this young man who wasn't baptized, well, their relationship looks like it's going okay at first. The young man is in a well-to-do family, and he starts making a lot of money himself, so right away they become materialistic. But the young man never becomes a baptized Jehovah's Witness. And shortly thereafter, problems ensue in their marriage. And their marriage spirals down, and in the course of their marriage spiraling down, we see the juxtaposition of the sister who is from time to time meeting this young brother who is a very spiritual man because he does all of the organization's activities. So eventually the young sister and that young brother get married, and they're very happy. Now they can pioneer together. They end up applying for one of the schools or for some assignment. But on the other side, you have the sister who married the young man who never got baptized, and what happens to them is their marriage almost falls apart. It becomes a real mess, and the breaking, or the thing that supposedly is the biggest issue, is that he never became spiritual, and second of all, he's never around because he works all the time. But the young sister's father steps in and prevents her from getting a divorce, so she can stay in her miserable marriage where the two aren't compatible, and the young man never becomes a spiritual person. But the driving thesis there is that all the problems are because the young man was not a spiritual person. They don't highlight the fact that he never spends time with the family or any of those things. But the other sister, where both of them were spiritual, wind up living happily ever after and doing all kinds of spiritual activities. So the message is loud and clear that the most important thing for young people to consider when looking for a marriage mate is how spiritual they are. What are their spiritual goals? The message comes across loud and clear that if somebody is not a spiritual person, they will not make a good mate. So, does this translate into reality? Well, myself, I have heard a number of experiences where people follow the course of the good sister and good brother in that video, and the results were nowhere near what they were supposed to be. In a number of those cases, one or the other of the mates ends up having some pretty severe psychological and or emotional problems that make it so that they're really not that compatible with the person they're now married to. And a second issue is that the way that Jehovah's Witnesses engage in courtship, it is actually extremely difficult to really get to know the person and how well you two will be compatible. So, I have actually seen some of the marriages that, according to that video, should have been some of the best marriages ever produced, wind up being some of the worst marriages produced. As an example, one of my friends told me a story where they were married to someone who was a pioneer, and for somehow they discovered after they were married that that pioneer had never studied their own watchtower, prepared their own comments, or written their own talks. Now, I'll grant you that is an extremely edge case, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. It turned out there were other problems personality-wise beneath that. And stories like that, sadly, are not isolated. It could be that the brother who's doing all those things has deep-seated emotional problems. Maybe he's a real control freak. Maybe he's a real jerk. Maybe he's abusive. But all these things happen behind closed doors, so people tend to look the other way about it. Maybe that sister that's a pioneer or doing whatever, maybe she has some real problems. I've heard a number of these stories. They're not isolated. My honest belief is that one of the reasons why the retention rate for people born into Jehovah's Witnesses is so low, it's somewhere around 34 to 30% stay in the religion that are born in, is because when they do everything right and they get married to someone who should be a good mate, they find the exact opposite to be the case. They find their lives turned upside down. So this video is advocating something that sometimes I will grant you that it works out. If the two people that are spiritual people, as defined by the organization, are both somewhat well balanced, then they can probably work it out. However, I think the chances of that happening aren't really as high as the organization would like you to believe. I think the chances are actually closer that if you wind up pursuing spiritual people, you might end up being more likely to get somebody who has significant issues that they haven't properly dealt with. On top of this, there is a fundamental issue with making the most important thing in your marriage the other person's so-called spiritual qualifications. Marriage is literally between two people, and if you decide you want to have God in it, that's all fine and good. But those two people have to live together on a day-to-day basis. God is not going to come down into the house or the apartment and settle the differences for these two people. These two people have to have the maturity and the ability to do that for themselves. And moreover, these two people have to form a bond. They have to have something in common. They have to get along together. They have to love each other. They have to like each other. They have to be best friends or something thereabouts. If the only thing that you have in common is that you both do organizational activities, you might both be radically different people from each other. And what might happen, and what I believe does happen in a number of cases, is you wind up living separate lives together. And that, in my mind, factors heavily to the fact that the retention rate is so low. So, yet again, the society has gone to great efforts to promote what really amounts to a fantasy about the way courtship works. And in this particular case, I believe it's a destructive fantasy. What they're interested in is getting more people to work harder for them. They don't really care about how those people's lives works out. That doesn't matter. Because if people do things their way and then things don't work out, they're going to tell them, well, you need to study more. Well, you need to pray more. Well, you need to preach more. You have to go to more meetings. You've got to come to more meetings. You need to engage in other forms of the ministry, so on and so forth. So the very thing that is actually at the basis of their problem is what is being advocated as the solution to that problem. So that's just my brief little thought for today. So Spike dressed up for the occasion. But anyways, I just thought I'd put that out there for people to think about. And maybe your experience is different. Maybe you've heard different things. I don't know. I am by no means the authority here. I am just putting out things that I've heard and things that I've seen. So thanks for watching.